This is not so much a pair-up of who would win in a fight, but who can give us a fun game. Sisters are still losing a lot of tournaments, but this is a look at the average army lists of enemies to see who can give us a good game, not necessarily one we're gonna win. Fun games are better than games we win, although winning can play a part in that. We want to know that we can win, and that after we put the models on the table, we won't dread the next coming hours as the game plays out and we get stomped. Part of the fun is going to be your own attitude. You may go to battle expecting martyrdom and be happy that you canonically have played your part in the lore. That's funny, and also condolences. I did this a lot with Skaven in Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar. I would lose a lot, but after and during the fight, I would find some model of mine to blame for the disaster and make sure friendly fire happened in their general direction. The other part is your opponent. If they laugh at your armoured ladies and say they're going to crush you and do terrible things to your models, it doesn't really matter what faction they have. You might just want a different opponent. A fun opponent that you like chatting with makes up most of the game, but I can't make your opponent nice. I can point out archetypes of who is fun and who is less fun, but I can't do a tier list of the people you know at your local club. Even if I knew who they were, that would be creepy. Have I got all the caveats out the way? No! And if there is still some other big factor I missed, let me know. But this is for casual games with people at a friendly local club. These are not hard-hitting tournament lists. We're just finding opponents for the sisters where we can do well and have a good game against an average list. Here's what I mean by an average list. It takes one box that we can buy, makes a unit out of it, and then does the same again and again with a different box. So we have Sisters of Battle, but we have no Dominions because we already built them as sisters. We have Seraphim, but no Zephyrim. Again, same kit. The army doesn't skew towards a lot of vehicles and walkers and doesn't go mass infantry either. It is balanced. So this is the army list. We have Morwen Val as leader, with 3 Paragon warsuits. At least one of them wants to have a Maul, so we can do tank shock. One of the only ways we're going to be doing damage against enemy vehicles. And it gives us some hitting power, though not as much staying power as you would expect. We have 10 Battle Sisters in a Rhino, with a Hospitaller and a Palatine. So this is a very tough unit because of the 3+ save and the 5+ feel no pain. We just have to ignore the toughness 3, but that's why they're in a Rhino. So that they can get to an objective, start generating miracle dice. The Palatine has a Blade of Eleanor, so that when the enemy charges you, or you charge the enemy, you can be putting out a lot of damage in addition to the mortal wounds that the Palatine is doing. And the Palatine's lethal hits means that the Battle Sisters can wound a lot more enemies than they should be able to with their Strength 4 bolt guns. And I think we should put a Melter gun in here as well. And probably a multi-melter too, but that doesn't come on the sprue. You would have to jury-rig up a multi-melter by cutting apart the heavy flamer and attaching melter gun barrels, or you could just have a heavy flamer instead. There's a separate video on how to build the Battle Sisters. For a little bit more toughness and a little bit more damage, we have 5 Sacristants with an Imagifier. The Imagifier gives them a 2+ save because they already have a 4+ invulnerable save. And when a lot of small units are dying around them, we can be generating better miracle dice than we normally would. So they can go in the center. We have a Preacher with Arcoflagellants to get in there and do some damage. Or because of the 2 wounds and the feel no pain, the Arcoflagellants can tie up enemy units. But as we have +1 to wound and strength 5 and twin linked, we can definitely be wounding a lot of enemies. 5 Retributors going in Immolator with a Dialogus. Other than with heavy bolters, the Retributors are very short range, so you want to get them in a vehicle, move them up the battlefield so that they can use their guns effectively. And really, the only way to run Retributors, other than like many heavy bolters way up on top of a building, using plunging fire to get AP -2 with strength 5 and damage 2, that can work, but is still very overcosted. Most people just put them in an Immolator because the rerolls to wounds, regardless of the kind of gun that the Immolator has, can mean that our melter weapons, or heavy flamers, have an actual chance of doing damage against their targets. And we have a Dialogus so that we can change a damage roll into a 6 by using any miracle dice, even a miracle dice of a 1 which is otherwise useless. We have 5 Seraphim with hand flamers to attack the enemy rear and take their objective. We can drop in, shoot them off the objective, and then with the Seraphim ability to move after shooting, we can move onto that objective. And we have an Exorcist. The Castigator is also viable, but this is a church organ that fires missiles, so in fun terms, it is way better than generic tank. And it gives us some anti-tank. There's a Penitent Engine that can cut through heavy infantry very nicely, and it means that the Gearvessa can be re-educated. While we also have the Demonifuge, who can drop in nearby to the Seraphim because she is a lone operative and acts alone, and mess up the enemy backfield, or She can perform actions and hold objectives pretty safely, because nothing within 12 inches is going to shoot her. Or yet again, she can be used to assassinate enemy characters because she has precision. And that's a quick rundown of how I would use this 1500 points list. A fun level to play. You have enough units to take objectives, unlike at 1k where you may only have one unit per objective and you aren't even playing as Custodes. And 1500 points is way quicker to play than 2000 points. It lets you have a range of units, and casual gamers who enjoy the theme of the sisters may have a list just like this. Shout out to that person. I haven't written a list for every other faction. I can only make one list on the Games Workshop app because I'm not paying for that, but also I'm not trying to recreate Combat Patrol but at a higher points level. But their faction list would follow a similar idea. Common units taken, not common tournament lists, but the units where you think of the faction and these units come to mind regardless of the meta. So an Eldar army will have some Aspect Warriors and not be 100% Wraithguard and Wraith Knights. Hopefully you're able to find some players to have a fun game with, and not every match you play is a slog with every victory being hard won. Even if that is what you like, but it's nice to have a change. If you can only find opponents that fight close to the meta, suggest a more casual game. Usually you can find someone willing to take it a bit easier when you are playing a game for fun. 40k will never be balanced the way that like chess or snooker is, so I always get confused when Games Workshop pushes hard that 40k can be a competitive sport. Anyway, here are the different tiers. Let's make this a tier list, and even if you do only play competitive sisters, which is a very small niche, I will say, this will give you a look at the strengths and weaknesses we have against different factions. But mainly we're looking at fun. The Adeptus Mechanicus. They have a lot of Skitarii infantry, and they have, in the past, and kind of in the present, had points similar to what the Battle Sisters have. And when I say in the past, I don't mean a couple of months ago when they were way overcosted for their Skitarii Rangers. I mean like when they were introduced a couple of editions ago. We both have toughness 3 infantry, they have a 4+ save, we have a 3+ save, and we both get a 6+ invulnerable save. They get it from their bionics, we get it from faith. A much better way to get an invulnerable save. They have vehicles that have similar roles to the Battle Sisters, but we have a very different aesthetic. They have this whole body horror thing going on with the tentacles and the whip arms. We have... Okay, never mind that one. We're very similar. We're very similar factions. But of course we must fight because they worship the Emperor in a totally wrong and horribly different way. As if the Emperor would be a machine that creates machine spirits and makes machines work. We know he's a divine being that makes everything work, but that should be a great fight. The Chaos Knights, they have mechanics that mean that they can scare people away. A lot of battle shock tests being caused, and Battle Sisters have a very low leadership. Unless you're going for the very epic heroes, it's a 7+ leadership on a Canoness. And also what we don't have is anti-tank for all of the different vehicles that are going to be turning up. There is no casual Chaos Knight list that isn't a lot of tough vehicles. Even if it's War Dogs, something that is possible for us to take down with the Paragon War Suits, the Palatine, the Retributors can have a go, certainly, and so can the Exorcist. There's going to be quite a few War Dogs, and the bigger Chaos Knights, we're not going to be able to put them down very easily. And because there are only several units in our army that can feasibly hurt the Knights, the Chaos Knights have very obvious targets what to go for. We can't be getting +1 to wound through stratagems if we're battle shocked. And the Retributors getting out of an Immolator to reroll wounds, that's probably going to be a once per game thing. It's unlikely they're going to survive to get back in the Immolator, to move and then get out and do it again. Especially since you can't embark and disembark in the same turn. I'm not saying you can't have fun against Chaos Knights. Putting down some traitors who have this feudal aspect, but not Battle Sisters feudal aspect with the Crusaders and the Crusader model that you could pick up will make it a Crusader, but I think it's not the most fun matchup. The Custodes, we outnumber them. We have melter guns that can break their infantry. The missiles on the Exorcist are very good against their infantry. We don't have to rely on blast, and the Exorcist missiles don't have blast, but there's several more things that are wounding them on 3s. They're very high toughness. Every one of their infantry models is basically a tank. Our Archoflagellants can be a pain to tie up the enemy because of the several wounds and the feel no pain. The Seraphim can knock any Sisters of Silence off objectives. And I would say that rules and points, as they are, it is more likely that the Custodes would not have a fun time against us. So the burden would be on us, but probably fun, as long as we play nice. And who's to say that the Custodes didn't fight the original Sisters when we were with Gauge Vandire before they found out that the Emperor wanted to have a word with the original 6 Saints? Ah, Space Marines. Through every edition, the Space Marines have been only a couple of points more than the Battle Sisters. And at the start of 10th edition, actually, Retributors cost more than their much better Space Marine Devastator Squad counterparts. This isn't fair. And when you're facing against something that is you, but better, for about the same points, it can be really unfortunate. There are a lot of traitor chapters and traitor companies and traitor squads and a bunch of traitors that haven't gone full chaos, but definitely don't serve the Emperor, or are so wrapped up in their own thing that they don't even worship the Emperor. How unacceptable. So we've got to fight them, but when we're fighting against another power-armoured army, the most common power-armoured army, and everything they have is us but better, it doesn't really spark fun. Just a feeling that they have what we should have, and then we get weird things like the not Predator tank. You have to have enough heavy bolters to take them out, and our list doesn't have sufficient heavy bolters. And then what if we played against Space Marines, but they outnumbered us? That's how it is with Black Templars. They have our theme, they have our hand flamers, and as a horde of Space Marines, even if the points are in our favour compared to a Space Marines points, there's still going to be a lot more Black Templars than there are Sisters. And again, they are us, they are so much us, they are the theme of us, but better. And a Dominion and a Space Marine being the same points doesn't seem correct. But that's the world we're living in right this minute. Them Loyalist Knights that may be about to go traitor, that's why we need to intercede against them, just like we might have to intercede against the Black Templars for almost going traitor. Maybe they are a bit too bloodthirsty, maybe there's just too many of them, and they're not following the rules. So the Inquisition sends in the Sisters to deal with them, just as we may deal with some knights that aren't doing their proper knighting stuff. We say, hey, we need some knight allies, they say, we need to crush some peasants that are getting a bit uppity, and so we have a bit of a fight on our hands. These knights are the allies that we would take to compensate for our own lack of anti-tank. But a mix of big knights and small knights, it's a lot of knights, a lot of vehicles, and with a hunter-killer missile and exorcist and tank shock from a Paragon warsuit, even if we're throwing grenades every single turn, it's not going to be enough. And it becomes an asymmetrical game of, we will try and stay still and hold objectives, not being able to kill the enemy, and they will try and push us off objectives. At this point, we stop doing the war part of the war game and instead do the sitting still on objectives and saying, I'm not taking part in this shooting business. I'm just going to sit here. And it changes the game in a way that doesn't feel sistery. Imperial Guard might like it because sitting on objectives and dying for the cause is what they're all about. We die for the cause, but not on objectives. We die fighting the enemy. The Leagues of Votann are mutants and must be purged, but they're also a middling infantry, like not actually elite infantry, definitely not horde infantry. So they fall in our sort of similar range. Now their 1500 points is one of everything, and then more Hearthguard, because right now they have such a small roster that a bit of everything to get their average list was still not 1500 points. They probably will get some new units relatively soon, stealing the demo charges from the Genestealer cult, I think. But when we can put all of our anti-tank into the Hecaton land fortress and try and take it down, or we have all of our different shots go for everything other than the land fortress, ignore the land fortress, pretend the land fortress isn't there, and try and survive the land fortress, where its guns mean that, actually, having a 6+ invulnerable save might come into effect for the first time. I'm not saying we look down on the Votann. I am saying that. And their weapons as well are pretty good at killing our level of infantry. So I think it should be a nicely paired up fight. Probably fun. But if the land fortress gets a bit much, and the Votann weapons are able to just blow away our sisters before we can do anything, then we're going to have less fun. The Grey Knights. They lack what we lack. Anti-tank. Their Dread Knights are just not as tough as you would think. Just like our Paragon warsuits are not as tough as you would think. Their teleporting around can be curtailed because we are a little bit of a horde, so we have a lot of bodies all over. And then we will see who wears who as a hat. This is a Space Marine style faction that definitely isn't going to outnumber us. So they feel our pain, they're on roughly the same level, and we can both moan as we are both overlooked factions that specialize in killing one kind of enemy. We kill witches. They kill demons. We have never heard of demons. So why would we fight? Well, the sisters could be accused of heresy, or perhaps the sudden presence of some marines that have no record of being loyalist or existing, and they're all psychers? That sounds pretty sus to me. Better do our anti-psyker business. But they're great fun to play with. Demons. Never heard of them before. Chaos demons can deep strike around the board to get around us, though we have board presence in a lot of places to resist that. Thematically, the idea of demons turning up just to come and touch our stuff and mess with faith, that's very on point. The Imperium versus Chaos, yeah, it works. For official records, of course, they are weird warp aliens that have just come and attacked us. Chaos gods are not real. They can't hurt you. And they don't have millions of minions formed of all the sadness and rage in the galaxy. If we're fighting Tzeentch, then we have things like the Condemner Bolt Gun, which is anti-psyker, so we can use that to pincushion a chicken. We can show the Flamers of Tzeentch real fire, but the Chaos Demon lists tend to have several greater demons and a lot of little demons. If we can't take out the bigger Nurgle demons, we're not going to have a great fun time. If we get murdered instantly in melee by Khorne, we're never going to get to use our flamers other than for Overwatch. And who are all these crazy corset-wearing ladies running around? I don't remember putting Repentia in the list, but their invulnerable save is better than ours, so Melter Guns can still be saved. I think we'll struggle, but it can probably be fun. If they're going the more Nurgle-focused route and are playing Death Guard, I think less fun. The Death Guard abilities now to not only give us -1 toughness, so that their strength 4 weapons are wounding us on 2s, they can also degrade our armor save, the only thing that is keeping us safe. Death Guard points have gone down a lot, so they can fall into the Space Marine situation of they are elite, but still have similar numbers to us. All of their infantry require anti-tank weapons, kind of like the Custodes. However, they have so many of them that we're going to run out of anti-tank capability pretty quickly. Cutting down horde after horde of poxwalkers can be fun, but if you get in combat, it is just a grind to see who can take out who first, and if we're looking at an average Death Guard list, it's not loads of poxwalkers. I have a popular video on how to play Death Guard and win, which was done before they got a points drop, but that relies on very extreme armies, vehicle heavy or infantry horde. But your average Death Guard list, I think it's going to be one of the harder pairings. Orks. Lots of boys, Gretchen, Truck, Killer Cans. We have the Flamer strength to hurt their toughness 5 that any other Space Marine faction doesn't. Apart from if you're going the Salamander's task force, then you get +1 strength at 12 inches. Our Melters can hurt their light vehicles. And the idea of Morwen Val plus Paragon Warsuits against Ghazghkull and Meganobs sounds great fun. Ghazghkull is only toughness 6 right now, and I don't think this will be unfair on the Orks. Once they get us in close combat, we will disappear as we find that the Bloody Rose becomes a Bloody Mist. And we have history. On Armageddon, a famous Ork fighting place, lots of the Order of Our Martyred Lady died in the war. It is why they are Our Martyred Lady. And Armageddon had one of their biggest convents, which was overrun by Orks. And when we're fighting against Ork players, they tend to get into the spirit of the army better than most. Orcs should be a great pairing. The Battle Sisters are often called upon to put down cults. Hunting witches and traitors is our thing. So when you find out that there's some Xenos worshipping... Ah, thank you. That's very nice of you to provide money. It's not even a live stream, but thank you. Where was I? Xenos cultists. There are some Xenos worshipping cultists knocking about, and the sisters' job is to get rid of them. We have a lot of counters for each other. The neophytes popping up can do damage to the Battle Sister squads when we're only toughness 3 and their strength 3 weapons, while the neophytes would struggle against tougher opponents like the Death Guard's toughness 5 and definitely the Custodes' toughness 7, but the sisters can counter that with Overwatch Flamers. There's the Immolator. Bye-bye neophytes. Acolytes pop up with demo charges to take out the Paragon Warsuits. This is why I think having a heavy flamer in the squad is not the worst idea. But just one won't be enough to cut down the acolytes to the point where we're cutting into their demo charges. And for the sisters, fighting a lot of toughness 3 and toughness 4 enemies that don't have an absurdly high save means our bolt guns can be put to use. And the Genestealer cult are not as hoardy as you think. They get units back because of the points suggesting that their faction special rule is baked into their points cost. There are not as many acolytes and neophytes as you would expect from a horde of Xenos cultists. And if you want to read about the Battle Sisters fighting the Genestealer cult, There is The Rose in Darkness and The Cult of the War Mason as books I recommend. As long as we don't get overwhelmed by the cult ambush, this will probably be fun. If this is all about a matter of religion and faith, what if we were fighting against other battle sisters? They don't have to be battle sisters that have turned traitor and are using like a fan-made Chaos Battle Sisters list. We could be having training exercises together. We could be having theological debates that also happen to involve training exercises firing bolt guns at each other. Although we don't have a massive roster, a lot of our units are very similar to one another. While we have Archoflagellants and Exorcists, they could have Repentier and Castigators. Very similar units, but definitely different units. Maybe instead of Battle Sisters, they have Dominions. Instead of a Hospitaller, they have a Magifiers. We have the Demonifuge and they have Death Cult Assassins. And it's nice to be with a fellow sister player when we are pretty rare. I picked a very, very small niche for which faction I'm going to talk about most, as well as the Genestealer cult. Another extra niche faction. But a fellow Battle Sisters player will understand our pain. Our bolt guns will be wounding on 3s, that's a fun novelty. And the melter guns that they're firing at us, we will get to use our 6+ invulnerable save. In 10th edition, when's the last time you actually got to roll that? I think it'll be a great pairing. The Tyranids have a lot of different playstyles. They can go hordes of little ones, they can go lots of big ones, they can go for a mix in the middle, and we'll be assuming they're doing a mix in the middle, probably with the invasion swarm. I've now fought against all of the different Tyranid detachments that have come out in 10th edition, and I think it's only the Crusher Stampede with a lot of big monsters that presents the biggest challenge for us, which you'd think is odd, because that is considered the worst of the Tyranid detachments. But an average list, sort of like the starter box set, plus some Tyranid warriors, Hormigans, Genestealers, and a monster like a Haruspex, that's fun to deal with. And the Tyranid player has a lot of different options with the invasion swarm. Do they go for the lethal hits against our tanks? Then even their lighter creatures can damage our vehicles. They don't have particularly high strength weapons. A venom cannon is not going to be able to punch through a tank. It is not las cannon equivalent. They may want to go sustained hits because of all the infantry we have and try and clear out our infantry. Or they can go for precision and try and get rid of the characters that are the linchpin of the Sisters list. With Faith fighting monsters and the Shadow and the Warp, which is only once per game, and I know there's Neurolictors that can zap an extra battle shock onto you, but it's not massively affecting our low leadership. And we should be able to kill everything there just as they can kill everything of ours. Fighting Tyranids is a great pairing, and in 10th edition I've rarely had a game against Tyranids that wasn't loads of fun. The Necron aliens present a different challenge. We're definitely not wounding on 3s against little ones, and we have to figure out how we're going to take down their massive blobs. We can have Ephriel Stern assassinate their lords and cryptex. We can have Morwen Val perform an epic challenge to try and assassinate one of the characters. They'll come back, but if we can combo Val and then Ephriel Stern, we can put down a character twice. At 1500 points, a tactic for the Necrons tends to be have 3 blobs, one holding the home objective, perhaps with just 10 Necron warriors, perhaps 20 Necron warriors with no support. Then Necron warriors and Lichguard blobs holding 2 other objectives. Thus, in most scenarios, they are scoring full points because they have, of the 5 objectives, at least 1, at least 2, and more than us. And they have plenty of other distraction units that can get in the way. Scorpeth destroyers, Locust destroyers, a tide of scarabs hitting our Exorcist and then exploding. I mean, that's just fun. It's a very different puzzle to take on compared to other armies, but if you're not expecting that puzzle, if you're not quite equipped for that puzzle, it's not going to be as fun. But probably fun. That will very much depend on the Necron player. The Thousand Sons are also a very different army. They have a lot of Psykers. They are witches. They are our preferred prey, in theory. On the tabletop, that doesn't quite translate, because Games Workshop wouldn't want it so that any one faction instantly counters the other one. This is why the Grey Knights don't all have anti-demon weapons, because if they were against a demon army, they could just wipe them off the table pretty quickly. And everyone knows that's what would happen. We can gun down their Zangors, but against their psychic powers, as we haven't taken an Inquisitor for any kind of anti-psychic resistance, we're gonna suffer pretty badly. There's no anti-psycho resistance, not even like the 8th edition version where we could resist Smite, but only if we rolled a 6 after the opponent rolled like a 5 on 2d6. With the psychic phase gone, we're vulnerable to it. And the Thousand Sons are a very powerful shooting army. More powerful than us, I think. But they do skew towards the very elite. If we can have our Exorcist, our Paragon Warsuits, and Retributors and Immolator survive, we can take out their Terminators and Rubric Marines. And if the enemy has brought Magnus, hitting him with a couple of precision Condemner bolt guns can be fun, because they wound on 2+, doing devastating wounds. And Ephrael Stern, anti-chaos weapon. This is the perfect prey. But not for a lot of the sisters, and their psychic powers can just blow us away. If you can use the ritual to just turn off our armor save, the only thing we have protecting us, well, get ready to roll those 6+ invuln saves. But probably fun. If we're thinking firepower, then we're also thinking of the Tau. They like long-range firepower. We as Battle Sisters like short-range firepower. It's a bit of a mismatch. If we can get close to the enemy, which will involve doing a lot of outflanking, then maybe. Otherwise, we're having to hide, which doesn't make it fun for the Tau player who's got nothing to shoot, or we're running up the board, taking bullets as we go. Not the best tactic, especially when they have all of the equipment and missiles and weapons. Even a Piranha has 2 equivalents of hunter-killer missiles. They can knock out our vehicles. And then we're walking towards them. And as soon as they put a screening unit like Kroot that can do combat in front of that army, we're not going to be able to reach them. And we're not going to be able to shoot some of their more dangerous things like the Ghost Keel, because that is essentially a lone operative. Unless the scenario means that we're fighting really close, I don't think we're going to have a great time against Tau. And their battlesuits can drop in. Paragon warsuits cannot. And their battlesuits can take down Paragon warsuits. Our Paragon warsuits need to get in combat to beat them. And they can fire and fade to get away from us. We'll be relying quite a bit on Ephrael Stern and the Seraphim to drop in and take out some spotting units. It's doable, but I think we're just at a tactical mismatch. The Eldar are another shooting, speedy, get out of the way of the enemy faction. We're looking at an average list, so I'm assuming that there are some aspect warriors, but because of our army and the relatively small roster that we have, their aspect warriors will always have a perfect target available. Striking Scorpions are meant to be anti-light infantry, Banshees are meant to be anti-heavy infantry. We fall perfectly in the middle so that either of them are good against our sisters. Although they are toughness 3, the aspect warriors have a better invulnerable save than us. So even if we're putting out melter shots, they're back onto a 5+ invulnerable save. And as we like short-range firepower and close combat, and the Eldar like to not be anywhere near us that they don't have to be, we'll be playing chasing and catch-up. I know that Eldar are dominating right now. They are less dominating following balance patches. They certainly are beatable, and I've met a lot of nice Eldar players. Proxy Hammer is one of them who's willing to try out many different lists. Not just going, here's the meta, here's how we exploit it, here's how you turn 60% win rate into 100% win rate. Eldar players can be alright, but tactically, we have Overwatch as a counter, and a couple of other things. But it's a tactical mismatch and a bit of an upward struggle. If you're wanting to play a very casual game, which this is meant to be, fighting Eldar switches it straight onto hard mode. But Dark Eldar are not hard mode. Dark Eldar currently don't have the best points. Their poison weapons kind of work in our favour as we have low toughness but high armor save, so we are the perfect resistance to them. Their weak vehicles can go down to our melter guns, something very nice to have, that there's some faction besides like Orks, for whom our melter guns are actually scary in this edition. And when they get into combat, if they haven't got high AP, we can actually use our armor save. The amount of flamers we have for Overwatch is very upsetting for Dark Eldar players that want to get into combat. And while they have the similar shoot and hide stylings of the Eldar, they don't have the numbers to be able to back it up, and every loss does cut them down. I think the bigger problem will be making sure we are kind enough to the Dark Eldar player. Otherwise, the Drukhari have a very bad matchup. So as long as we can be a good player, it works. Probably fun. A more classic matchup is Battle Sisters versus Chaos Marines. Because Chaos have a lot of cultists and we put down Chaos cults. The accursed cultists that can run and charge and get into combat can be the perfect mirror for our Arco-Flagellants. And who's to say that some of the reformed Chaos cultists after the fight won't become additional Arco-Flagellants? They have quite a lot of tough infantry, but when they outnumber us, it's because of the number of cultist units and things like Chaos Spawn. It's not because their points are so perfectly optimized that they're considered better than Battle Sisters. And their Armor of Contempt costs 2 command points and isn't called Armor of Contempt, so we're not going to see that appear every single turn, which gives our anti-tank, anti-heavy infantry weapons a chance of actually getting through them. It's certainly thematic, and the Chaos Space Marines will feel tough compared to Battle Sisters. While on the tabletop, Space Marine equivalents are very average. just because of the number of power-armoured factions and the way that since Space Marines are the most sold, they're the most played, they are like the middle baseline for what is a regular infantryman, at least on the tabletop. Chaos Forces want to get close with the majority of their units, so that matches us wanting to get close and into combat, either to do short-range shooting or to fight them sister to heretic, eye to eye, massive Paragon Warhammer to traitor armor. And there's nothing in the Sisters roster that Chaos are going to say, oh, we just cannot deal with that. So I think it'll be a great pairing. If we are killing mutants, why not also Space Wolves? They're a bit more elite and specialized than regular Space Marines. They have the weird Wolfen thing that can fight our combat sisters. And although they can be quite generic Space Marine, assuming they're using the Space Wolves focused detachment, they are using a lot of characters. We as Battle Sisters are also using a lot of characters. That pairs up quite nicely. The problem is, they are still us, but a bit more points optimized, because a lot of their units are either the same as or only a little bit more expensive than the regular Space Marine ones. And there was that time, just after Armageddon, when the Inquisition went to sanction the Space Wolves, and a lot of Battle Sisters were killed by Space Wolves off-screen. That's mean. But probably fun. Blood Angels are in a similar position. The Sons of Sanguinius detachment isn't straightly overpowered, it's a lot about combat, and the additional strength and attack isn't going to be that drastic when they were already wounding us on 3s. They also have Flamer pistols and Melter pistols on their Death Company units. That's our thing. But their Seraphim are far more expensive than ours. Because they can be a bit less points optimized compared to us than the Space Marines, and I know they have the like Black Templars, us but better aspect going on, I think this is more where we find kindred spirits, because their tactics are more like ours, and less like the Black Templars' horde of Space Marines. So probably fun. And I'm just going to neaten this up now. More divergent chapters. The Dark Angels. They play so close to Space Marines, but with more plasma weapons, something that can get through our armor even on the lowest setting. You don't even need to overcharge your plasma weapons, and you're still upsetting a Battle Sister's day. Something that they add on to the Space Marines is extra tough Terminators. So now we're playing like we need to take down a Necron blob. We can't assassinate the characters because the Apothecary in the Deathwing Knights isn't a character. They're just a person that brings back a model every single time. So that's incredibly tough to deal with, plus all of the usual Space Marine stuff. That is us, but points optimized, and also with a much larger range of weapons, like plasma cannons, las cannons, grav cannons, things that aren't the Holy Trinity. I don't know particularly why we would fight. It's not like a Battle Sister could be one of the Fallen, just a big dude in a wig sitting around with sisters going like, yeah, I'm one of you, Scholia Progenium and all that. Babes. But maybe they know someone who met a Fallen, and that's why the Dark Angels want to kill them. It would be a bit confusing. But I think not the most fun. The Deathwatch are another super specialized Space Marine chapter, but they're focused on killing aliens, something that the Battle Sisters definitely are not. And the Deathwatch collectively, I mean, maybe we could say they fell to chaos, or were going to fall to chaos, if we take the words of Captain Artemis to the extreme, that he doesn't care if the galaxy falls to chaos and humanity dies, as long as we also kill the alien. That could be our only in as a theme for why Battle Sisters are fighting the Deathwatch. But on the tabletop, neither of us are using our speciality. The Deathwatch are not getting their rerolls on their Kill Team veterans, and the Sisters are not able to use their anti-chaos, anti-psycho weapons. They're still Space Marines, they're not as cheap, certainly, so it can be okay without us feeling outnumbered by Space Marines. Their Proteus Kill Teams are toughness 5, not toughness 5+ with loads of resurrections going on. At least in the rules right now, you can't have an Apothecary in that unit. Gameplay-wise, it's probably fine, but I don't think I can see a lore reason why we would want to fight each other. But if we're fighting some straight-up traitors, we have the World Eaters. They are coming in close. We like to fight close. They have some monsters and vehicles. We have sufficient anti-tank for that amount of vehicles. Our playstyles are compatible. We're getting in together. This isn't the World Eaters running at a Tau gun line and hoping to make it. It's not the Battle Sisters walking towards a Tau gun line and hoping to get into rapid fire range. While there can be a few different kinds of World Eater units, they tend to go much more towards the very elite, so we're not going to feel outnumbered or overwhelmed just on numbers of Space Marines. And our Seraphim can very nicely take down the Jackals that are probably holding their home objective. As long as we remember to screen some of the more valuable units, let the Berserkers get into combat with our Arcoflagellants and our Sacrosants, which have a very nice save, which should provide some resistance against the World Eaters, but we're still only a toughness 3, 1 wound unit. We can then counter with Morwen Val and the Palatine getting out of the Rhino, and well, we only need some Novitiates, and it's a nice refight of the final battle that saw the Sisters win a tournament. I think one of the few factions that the World Eaters would be more happy with is the Orks. But it's a great pairing, and we can use our anti-chaos weapons. And because they're not an absurdly powerful shooting army that's also tough, like the Thousand Suns, and because they're not just absurdly tough and there's lots of them like the Death Guard, the World Eaters pair up much better against us. Which only leaves the Imperial Guard, by which I of course mean Traitor Guard. They don't worship the Emperor enough. They stopped using Crusaders in their faction and gave them to us. So they're lacking faith. An Imperial Guard list that was skewed very much towards artillery or very much towards tanks would cause us a big problem. Even lots of infantry, when their lasguns are wounding us on 4s, remember, can cause us a problem. So any guard list that's skewed way towards one of the 3 different playstyles is going to be unfortunate. But a generic Imperial Guard army that has some infantry, some artillery, and some tanks, a kind of nice starter set of guardsmen, that can work. And when they're getting reinforcements to have more units back, unlike with the Genestealer cult and the cult ambush, there's not demo charges coming with them. And we can overwatch them. It's just going to depend if we have enough firepower to take out like 2 Leman Russes or a Leman Russ and a Rogel Dawn, when the Rogel Dawn can just resist 1 melter shot per game. Not as egregious as the Tau, where certain drones can just ignore a hit and change damage to 0, even after the failed save. I think we'd probably have a good time putting down a Traitor Guard insurrection. And that brings us to the end of the fun tier list. Remember, the player that's using these armies is going to count way more than the army itself, but just on playstyle, just on points, just on their most average style of play, this is who the Battle Sisters are going to have the most fun with. And if you looked at my very average Sisters list and thought, you know, that can be way more optimized, there are a lot more better units available, and if you also like tier lists, then I have a video just for you. My darlings and viewers, I'll see you there.